let's get the ball rolling. Well, speaking of which, the rumor is that there is a I don't know if it's an Android app or an iOS app or both, but there's a Mike Lippman soundboard going around campus. Yeah, that I think Nick Schumacher and a couple other people might have been Corey. Might have, I mean, some they worked in it, so it's got like me saying "shut up." I think me doing the dinosaur, "Rat" at that thing.
Christian worldview?
Huh?
Christian worldview point?
It may be. I don't know. That's not how you should, they might take requests for version 1.1 update or something.
DLC or something. I just know.
Some in-app purchase.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So this is 491, the course that 95% of you are not going to do what I'm going to tell you to do today. So hopefully you prove me wrong at least a little bit. This is a capstone course, a giant project course. Okay, so by the end of the semester, you should have put together something that you can throw on, like, a resume or a portfolio and go to your employer and say, look, I did something real. Okay, so this is something you should take seriously. Now, with that in mind, each of you are going to be working on different projects. So we'll talk about that a little bit more here in a few minutes. So the first 2 to 3 weeks of this class are going to be heavy, heavy, heavy paper writing, because you're going to be creating an idea paper, a requirements document, and a specifications document. Basically everything you learned about in software engineering, all in the first 3 weeks. All right, and those are going to be your governing documents for your effectively what will end up being your final project. So that most of the semester, you're working on the actual project. Now, in terms of time commitment, the project's designed to be a 20-hour per week commitment. So you do some math there. There's a lot of hours that now, not all of that is actually sitting there writing code, or if you're an IT person, building some network model or something like that. It's the whole process of researching stuff, figuring out how to do things, stuff like that. But it is a time commitment. And more often than not, what we see students, as usual, they half-ass the first couple, the requirements document, the specifications document, they slap something together to get a C on it or something. Fine. Don't do anything the entire semester. Decide to take it seriously 2 weeks before the end of the semester is up, and then it shows. Right? It's pretty clear when you were supposed to do, some 300 odd hours of work, and it looks like 5 hours of work, and it's not going to translate well into your grade. It's kind of the punchline. So take it seriously. Schedule time. Schedule this class as if it's a job. Okay. We will not meet every class period. In fact, for a majority of the semester, we won't be meeting. That doesn't mean you're not going to be seeing me on a weekly basis. So the thing is that since all of us are working on different projects, if you need to get together to debug something on your project or something like that, we'll schedule the time. We can do it during class time. We can do it at a time that's convenient for both of us. That's fine. Rather than having everybody come together while I talk to one group about their problems that they're having while everybody else is sitting there. Okay, but the first, first 3 weeks or so, we will have class. We might not stay the whole time. We'll stay as long as we have questions and that kind of stuff. But, a majority of this class is going to be you working on your project and having weekly communication with me in terms of your progress and that kind of stuff. With the hope that if every single week you're having to think about, am I keeping up with my project, that at some point that translates into you actually doing more than a half-assed job type thing. All right. How many of you are IT majors in here? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5.5 people. All right. So the rest of you are CS. So raise your hand if you're CS, so I could get the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people. Okay. So if you are computer science, the project you're going to work on is going to be something computer science related. And I'll talk more about the projects here in a few minutes. If you're IT, it must be IT related. Now, every single IT project must have a computer programming component in it. It doesn't have to be a heavy computer programming component. All right. Every single computer science project must have a heavy computer programming component to it. All right. It doesn't have to be all computer programming. So the typical thing I'll say is, I usually say that computer science is 75% creation, 25% using what's been created. So from a computer science project perspective, 75% of your project should be something about creating something new, probably through software. All right. 25% could be using something, leveraging something that's already been created, using a third-party API, stuff like that. On the IT side of things, it's 75% using what's been already created and 25% creation, which means your project should be 25% stuff that you made yourself. Okay, that could be, we can even use the term programming loosely. It could be scripting for creating user accounts, things like that, but a component like that has to exist in your project. Okay, something along those lines. And we'll come back and talk about projects here in a few minutes. All right. So this is your normal crap, blah, 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 learning outcome junk. All right, so these are the things that make up your grades and your grade in the class. So the first thing that you'll be creating is this thing called an idea paper. Your idea paper is your pitch to me for what your project will be. And that guy is due 1 week from today. All right. So between now and then, there should be quite a bit of communication between you and I during class, in between class, on Slack, via text message, via email, talking through potential projects that you're interested in working in to kind of massage it towards something that's appropriate for a senior seminar project. Now, a couple of problems historically that we have with senior seminar projects. Students have a really aggressive vision of something they want to do and they bite off more than they can chew. All right, so if we figure that the project should be roughly, what do we got, 16 weeks times 20 hours, so 320 hours of work, kind of throw midterm week out of there. So let's say roughly a 300-hour project. And then part of that's going to be that requirements document, the specifications document, the idea paper. So, when you think about around 300 hours as your total commitment to this project, we have to scope the project to fit into that bucket. All right. So you need to pick a project that is large enough to fill up those hours, while at the same time it needs to be small enough to be completable. All right, so don't pick something that's really a 1,000-hour project because you think it sounds fun and then get all stressed out because it's really just too big of a project to finish in those 300 hours. Part of that communication that should happen over this next week, whether it's in person here in class or text message or whatever, is going to be us taking your initial idea and kind of scoping it up or down to fit into something roughly something that should fit into 300 hours. I've been doing this for a few minutes, so I have a decent idea on whether that is probably big enough, whether that's definitely too big, or whether that's just not going to be enough. And we need to add some features. Okay, so something to start considering. So effectively, an idea paper is, let's say it's a 1 to 3 page paper. Depending on how much you have to pitch, and some of that might be bulleted or something like that. But it's effectively you articulating to me your grand idea, the 2,000-foot view of your project. Does that make sense? I'm going to do something that does this, and it's going to roughly have these features at a high level. All right, that's the idea paper. That's due next Monday, and we'll get and they'll be graded by the end of the day on Monday. So you'll have quick feedback on that. Because due a week later is the requirements document. Okay, and we have up here, here's a requirements document info doc that kind of gives you an idea on what a requirements document looks like, things like that. Now, everybody in here has had 370, right? Software engineering? Tell me, what's the purpose of a requirements document? What's that thing for? Is it just a good way to waste 20 hours of your life?
Figure out the what.
Figure out the what. That's very arbitrary of you to say.
Isn't that the, and then the specifications is the how.
Okay. So let's elaborate on that. So what do you mean figure out the what?
He's got it.
All right.
Figure out what your product actually does.
Okay. All right. So who's the requirements document for?
I think for the person making it.
Okay. I always look at requirements documents as kind of being a contract between the person making it and the person you're making it for. All right, and we'll talk about who your client will be in this in a few minutes. But effectively, once I say the idea paper, that sounds like a reasonable project. Now prove to me that it fits into that scope with that requirements document. So the requirements document is going to expand the idea into a very detailed description of each feature your product will have. Okay, if it's a website, if it's a mobile app, whatever it is, it's going to do this big picture item, and that's going to entail these 13 smaller steps. And each one of those is going to describe in detail what it means for that feature to exist. I should be able to, at the very end, go through your project and put check marks next to each bullet point in your requirements document, say fulfilled, 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 fulfilled. And if I have check marks next to everything, you met those requirements. Now, in the real world, what would happen is you originally create this requirements document that ends up being this contract. Because what always happens, and you're going to see it here, especially if you get a client that you're going to be working with, whether it's a church or something like that, you get feature creep. Your client says, oh, I want this. And then what ends up happening if you don't create a requirements document, it's like, oh, I got a pretty good idea what you want. And you kind of say, yeah, it's probably going to take me about this many hours. And you get about halfway done with it, then your client says, oh, but why doesn't it do this? Well, you didn't say you wanted it to do that. Yeah, but it needs to do that. And then they don't want to pay for the more hours because I thought that was implied. Okay, that should have been part of what I originally asked for. So that requirements document is extremely important to govern the agreement between you and who you're making the project for. All right. For me, it's going to tell me, fulfilling these requirements, is this roughly 300 hours of work? Or let's say 250 hours of work, since there's going to be time in creating these documents and that kind of stuff. All right. So I'm going to kind of look at it through that lens. Your client, for some of you, I will be your client. I'll be looking at it through the lens of, does this meet my expectations? Is this the product that I'm asking for? If it did all of these things as is fleshed out in this requirements document, will I be happy? That doesn't mean I wouldn't, in the end, maybe want to do 2 or 3 other things. But if I'm agreeing with, to hire a contractor to do something, and I'm going to pay them for so many hours, and they say, okay, I think I can deliver you these features in those hours. If in the end those 2 things match up, then you can shake hands and be friends. If you don't create a governing document like that, then when a client comes back and say, well, why doesn't it do this? And you say, well, you never asked me to do that. And the client says, yes, I did. You have nothing to point to say, no, you didn't. All right, so the requirements document is pretty important. All right, so that should not be half-assed is the punchline there. Now, as far as the format of the requirements document goes, I don't care what your specific format is as long as it fulfills its purpose. The purpose being, in an unambiguous way, describe and itemize all the features of your project. That's what it should do. If that comes in the form of a bulleted list, I'm okay with that. Okay. I'm not looking for you to go through and find those made-up sections. When you look at templates and stuff online, and there's some section that has like a made-up name, and you look like, okay, what kind of crap am I supposed to put in here as filler, right? I don't want the filler. Take your time and make sure that thing is itemized and clear in terms of fulfilling its purpose. That's what the requirements document does. Go ahead.
Page requirements for these documents?
Enough. Yeah. So, I mean, if you can show me, if you can detail out 250 hours worth of requirements in one page, I mean, I would think that would be unlikely that you could
say
do that.
We should have like the estimated hours next to this.
Yeah.
Any of this? Yeah.
Yep. So next to each requirement, I want you to estimate the amount of time you think it'll take you. Now, one thing every one of you is going to notice, and this is something I'm going to hopefully help you with as I look at the idea paper, then look at the requirements documents, is tell you whether you're horrifically underestimating or horrifically overestimating the amount of time. Because something you will get better at as you become professional developers or professional IT folk is you're going to get better at estimating your time. Initially, something you'll look at something and say, oh yeah, that should be easy. I can do that in 10 hours. And then 50 hours later, you're not done. Things came up. You had a misunderstanding about one of the pieces. Something you thought should have been trivial wasn't as trivial as it should be. Okay, so you'll kind of learn the strategy of under promise, over deliver. Tell them it'll take 60 hours, but it'll actually take you 50. Now they're happy because they just saved 10 hours worth of. But also keep in mind that I've been doing projects for a few minutes. So you're probably not going to be able to write on the paper that, oh yeah, this stupid little thing is going to take me 60 hours. You know, under promise, over deliver. I'm going to look at it and say that's more like 5 hours, not 60. So we'll have to go and find some more requirements there that fit in there. All right, so so next to each of your requirements, you should have a time estimate. Now, you don't need to get to the crazy granular level. So for example, what I typically like seeing in requirements documents, if I were writing one, is I like to go through and kind of maybe put some bullets for the broad requirements. So here are the kind of the 4 pillars of the project. It needs to be able to do this kind of stuff, this kind of stuff, this kind of stuff, and this kind of stuff. Then underneath each of those, I would explode that into additional bullet points, maybe even subpoints under each of those. So maybe under each of those, you might have 3 core requirements within that first pillar. And then under each of those 3, you might have 2 or 3 kind of like notes. It should do this, this, and this. You don't necessarily have to put time next to those sub points. Okay, I'm looking for either, you might want to go at least one level down, not just put times next to your 4 points, but go, one level in and say, okay, I figure that this stuff right here should take, 15 to 20 hours, something like that. All right. Don't waste your time getting granular on an individual word or something because it's A, going to be wrong, and B, it's just going to stress you out trying to put fake numbers next to bullet points, right? Again, this document is meant to be constructive, not a time waster, right? So I'm not looking for made-up sections. I'm not looking for you to come up with weird, fluffy paragraphs that say something. This thing should be effective, and it should be a governing contract between you, me, and you and your client for what you're going to ultimately deliver by the end of the semester. And I'm going to effectively give it the thumbs up or thumbs down on whether or not I feel it's within the scope of what a senior seminar project should be. Now, having said that, if I say, hey, that looks good, that seems to be big enough for a senior seminar project, and you end up being a rock star and you finish it in 150 hours, that's fine. I'm not going to tell you to go back and, well, you got to find 100 hours of more crap to put in there. If I agreed with it as being a big enough scope to begin with, that's because it's a big enough scope. And if you either underestimated the amount of time or you ended up being better at certain things than you thought you would be, I'm relying on my experience on noticing how long things should take. So, and I'm also, when I look at that through that lens, there's a couple of different ways I have to look at that. One, I'm also dealing with this at an individual level. Okay, so for example, a couple of you are pretty accomplished programmers in here. So if you try to tell me that some programming is going to take you 60 hours, well, I know it's really going to take you 2. Okay, you don't get to claim 60 hours. Yet somebody else who may not be a very good programmer claims it's going to take them 60 hours. That's more believable. Now, having said that, I also have to put this up against the measuring stick of where you should be as a computer science major or an IT major graduating. Okay, so if something would take you 60 hours, but really should take a computer science graduate 30 hours, I'm going to let you count 30, not 60. So that means you're going to have to work extra hard to, gain competencies that you maybe didn't walk to the table with. Does that make sense? Because at the end of the day, I know all you want your degree because you spent all this money for it, but your degree is going to be useless if we're not turning you to the wild with some competencies so that you're useful. You know, the last thing that we want is for you to go get a job somewhere as a computer science person, get fired 2 weeks later because you don't know what you're doing, and then we see you crying on Facebook that, you know, oh, I just got a new job at Target stocking shelves. Okay? Nothing wrong with stocking shelves at Target, but probably didn't want to spend $100,000 on a college degree to do that, right? So I'm going to come out with some competence here. All right, so idea papers due a week from today. Requirements document is due a week after that. Specifications is due a week after that. First 3 weeks of this semester are going to be heavy, heavy, heavy writing. And there should be a lot of back and forth between you and I, both in class and also between classes, checking on stuff. A couple of you have already been talking to me over break about ideas you have for projects, and we've been discussing that. So I'm pretty sure that was brought up in 490 last semester, right? To start thinking about projects. I think that's accurate. Dr. Lockley wrote it up, right? Okay. Now, as far as projects go, I do have one possible, I think it's going to be a mobile app, working with campus ministry here on campus. That I'm getting some more details on, but if that is something that sounds potentially of interest to you, I can loop you in on that conversation. We could try to get some details quickly. I do have kind of a starting point of details. It's for a couple of events they have like in September, so finishing it this semester would make sense. So that is one project. I do have a couple of other out of desperation projects I possibly can push your way, but the way it would work in the ideal world is you have some relationship in real life, whether it's with a family business, a church, somebody who you know that has a business, a department here at the university. You've gone and talked to a professor who has a good project idea, and they become your client. All right, and it fits that mold. If you're a computer science major, it's a project that you feel is that 75% creation, 25% using what's been created thing. Flip side for the IT folks. Okay, so it fits that mold. And then you pitch that idea to me with them being your client. All right, so ultimately that requirements document is going to have to make them happy from a, oh yeah, that's what I want perspective, but it's also going to have to make me happy from the perspective of it's a big enough scope. Kind of make some sense? All right, so that's one way you can come up with your idea. Now, on the flip side, if there is something that you would like to work on that you think would be either helpful for your education, it's something you're interested in, you think it would help round out your degree, it's some researchy thing you want to do, I can be your client. But you would then have to rely on me agreeing to I'm your client as well as the teacher for the class who's looking at that through two different lenses. Does that make sense? All right, because in the end, I'm going to ask each client to give me a review of how you worked with them. Okay, so something you don't want to have, which happens pretty often in my experience, is that if you have an external client, you meet with them fairly often for the first week or two, and then all of a sudden they don't hear from you for 12 or 13 weeks. And next thing you know, they're getting an email invitation to come to your presentation, and they've forgotten who you were. And there was no kind of betas delivered in the middle or follow-up meetings, making sure things were going okay, that kind of stuff. All right, so idea papers next week, requirements documents the week after, specifications documents the week after that. We will be meeting every single class for some amount of time at least for the first 3 weeks. Okay, if there's no questions, if you want to run ideas by me, if you want to say, okay, I'm working on my requirements document, and let's take next Tuesday as an example. I'm working on my requirements document, and these are the sections I have. Does this make sense? I might give you some pointers in that direction. If we have to do it offline between classes, that's good too. There should be lots and lots of communication going on between me and you during these first 3 weeks. After that, we won't meet for the normal class time very often. We will probably meet 2 or 3 times during the semester prior to the final presentations because we're going to have practice presentations. So somewhere before midterm week, we'll have kind of initial checkpoint presentations where each of you will get up and give a little 5-minute spiel on how things are coming with your project, that kind of thing. So if you haven't done crap, which will be some of you, it should be a nice embarrassing moment. Hopefully that'll get your butt kicked into gear so you start doing stuff. For those of you who've done a lot of stuff leading up to that, then you'll be impressive, and everybody will hate you because you're doing so well with it. And that's the way school should work. There's bullying and Okay, so punchline is that all of you should have a lot of your project done, in my opinion, by midterms. Not all of the project, but you should have quite a bit of your project done leading up to midterms. The idea shouldn't be that the second 8 weeks of the semester is when you do all the work. Okay, that's not what you want to have. Because keep in mind that, especially as seniors, that second 8 weeks is going to be stressful as you are fixing grades that aren't going so well leading up to midterms and you need to graduate. Then you're going to have applications for jobs and crap like that and all these other things going on. All right, so I would schedule senior seminar as if it was a job. Schedule out 20 hours per week and stick to that. That make sense? All right. So now documentation. This is due at the end. So this is due with your final presentation. Now, part of what documentation has to entail is effectively your time card. So every single time you work on your senior seminar project, whether it's working the idea paper, working the requirements document, you should log it like you logged work. Okay, so put it into a spreadsheet format, something like that, where this date, I worked from this time to this time, have a total thing over the end for 2 hours of work. In the end, all those should add up to something in that ballpark of 300 hours. If it adds up to 260 hours, I'm not taking points off, okay? But, it should be in that ballpark of 300 hours. I want you to, and it's going to be pretty clear if you documented 300 hours of fake work and what you present is some joke. I'll find it entertaining, but, it's going to be clear. If you say you did something for 300 hours, one of two things is true. You either don't have the competencies that you should have as a computer science or an IT major, and you shouldn't graduate yet. You need to spend some more time here. Or you lied about the work you put into it. One of the two. Make sense? I don't care either way. It's your life, not mine. But that's the punchline. We do have a big presentation at the end of the semester. This is about a 30-minute presentation followed by some questions and stuff. So it's, for a lot of you, 30 minutes is a pretty long presentation, right? It's difficult, I think, being in front of a group of people and speaking on some topic. Now, it should be something you're pretty familiar with because you've been doing it for, 300 hours leading up to that. But a 30-minute presentation is going to be stressful, but make sure you get your PowerPoint stuff together and, time it, do some practicing stuff, all sorts of crap like that. But notice the presentation is only worth 10% of your grade. Okay? And the chances of you coming up and doing a presentation that at least meets the 30-minute time period, that you hit the time of getting less than 70 on it, let's say, is pretty low. So a lot of students view the presentation as the project, and that's not the case. Okay? The presentation is just you sharing the work. Some of you are going to present really, really, really well. You're going to be very prepared, all that stuff, and you're going to do great in the presentation. The rest of you, if you're just not comfortable in front of groups or you seem nervous, even nervousness doesn't lose points. I'm not a speech teacher, so I'm not going to take off points for that kind of stuff. But you don't fill the time. You didn't really, answer the questions that really needed. I'll give you a kind of a structure for that, what things you need to cover in that presentation. But as long as you hit the time period, you're probably going to get at least a 70 in the presentation. If you just stand up there and sweat for 30 minutes. Okay? It is what it is. We had a student last year present, was it last year? No, oh my gosh, this was, I think, 3 years ago. We had a student present for 2 minutes. It was a joke. Okay. And we passed that person. We didn't want him again. Yeah, no, sometimes we hate you more than you hate us. It's all recorded. It's good. All right. So, and then finally, what you'll turn in, this has to be by the end of finals week, is your actual implementation. That's where documentation will come in as well. So your documentation is going to come in two pieces. One piece will be your documented hours that you put into it. The other piece is documentation that's appropriate for whoever would take over your project. That might not be a real person, right? You know, sometimes your project's a one and done type thing, but if your project would be handed off to a client, and that client might want to hire somebody next year, for example, to come and add on to it or do something with it, your documentation should be able to let a competent person, so a person like yourself, it shouldn't have to teach them all the computer science stuff, but it should allow a competent person to get up to speed on what you've done fairly quickly and then continue on your project from there. So that means documentation will come in different forms depending on the project. Some of your documentation will be a whole lot of writing, a lot of detail stuff, walking people through tutorials and things like that. Some of your documentation might just be kind of given, some information about directory structures and some of the different, if it's an application, maybe you kind of document the different objects that are involved in there and what they each do. If you do your project in Java, you could even use the JavaDoc API to just generate your documentation. So, depending on your project, the documentation might look different and might be more or less time consuming than others. But more than likely, it's going to balance out when you look at all the time you spent on both sides. Okay, but it's guaranteed that as we get close to the semester, somebody's going to ask me every day, what's the documentation supposed to be like, and what's how long does it need to be? And I'm going to say it needs to be long enough for your project, and it needs to be, it needs to meet the requirements of letting somebody get themselves up to speed on your project and pick up where you left off. Okay? And that's going to mean different things for different projects. That makes sense? All right. Documentation is only worth 10% of your grade. Implementation obviously is worth the most as any of the individual pieces. But notice that over the next 3 weeks of the semester, 40% of your grade is going to be decided in the next 3 weeks. Don't turn these in late. Okay? Get them in on time. Even if it's weak and you have questions, let me give you points. Okay? I mean, if you turn in something that's kind of crappy, but you turn it in on time, I can give you a lot more points than when I give you a 0 for, I need an extra day to work on this. Your requirements document might change a little bit during the semester. It can be a living document to an extent. So get those things in on time. All right. Questions? Anything I didn't talk about? All right. Anybody have any project ideas you want to run by me right now? We still have some time left, and I can give you my initial impression or maybe give you some things to think about whether it's in the right direction. A couple of you have already spoken with me on email conversations. So anybody have any ideas they want to talk about? Go ahead.
The ice stream I work at, we just have a whiteboard that we put locker room schedules on and stuff. And I've seen it at other ice streams where they can have a computer screen or something where they can digitally upload schedules for locker rooms and stuff, and then also have Twitter feed or video off to the side showing what their games have been like.
Mm-hmm.
Something like that going on. I was thinking, because it's a double ice stream, it's the one that Concordia skates at. So if we could get that for both sides, 2 separate locker room schedules, or put it on both screens, I don't know.
Okay, so
like that. There's nothing in existence at the arena right now.
Okay, so they already have these screens, and are they doing something with the screens right now?
They don't have. I could do. They have screens that I could use.
Okay.
But I've seen it at other ice streams done. Our ice stream just has a whiteboard for our locker room schedule.
Okay, I got you. So you're thinking about kind of like what we have out in the hall here, some sort of digital signage that can be managed by some software. You can put up schedules or. Okay, and where would these ultimately live?
Like, what do you mean, like location?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, there's where the whiteboards are. There's mount points we could put a screen on. I could either like put like a pie on it maybe or something small.
Okay.
Or centralize a component, or because we have a lot of cabling running through the ceilings too, so I could run a central component where our network is.
Mm-hmm.
So
the reality is you're CS, right?
IT.
You're IT, okay.
Yeah.
So the reality is you would probably be using some existing kind of management software.
I would maybe.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of kind of caveats to those kinds of problems. So, in my view, if you want to do something fairly custom so that it can meet flexibility needs,
Yeah.
you're best off having just normal TVs as your screen. So for you, you can test it on we have TVs here. You can test it on these. You can test it on a computer screen. Effectively, the thing is just your monitor,
Yeah.
right? And you have a computer program that's ultimately driving what shows up on that monitor,
What I was thinking.
right? Now, I'm relatively okay. From my initial perspective, that project sounds a little bit closer to CS than IT,
Okay.
but that's okay. I mean, because I think there is an IT component. It's probably closer to like a 50-50 split there. So there'd be a little bit more programming, but I mean, you're a pretty decent programmer. So if you feel comfortable with that, I'm okay with that.
I'd like the learning side of that too.
Yeah.
I
So
was thinking maybe like have it so that like an Excel document could put the times in. I don't know, something simpler to use.
okay. So there would be
There's
some
not
sure of
guys there,
interface. Sure. There would be some sort of interface for the people at the ice rink to be able to go into a web page or something like that and put the crap in that needs to be on those screens and hit a submit button and all of a sudden it's on the screens.
Yes.
All right. I get it. Now, you say you work there.
Yes.
So is this something that, because one thing we don't allow is it can't be part of your job. Like they can't pay you to do this. So this has to be something outside.
Related to my job.
Now, one.
I just tried the Zamboni, so.
Oh, I gotcha.
Yeah.
I gotcha. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think that's a bad idea. I think we just have to come up with those requirements to kind of make it big enough in terms of what features they should be able to do and that kind of stuff. But I think that's a reasonable starting point.
Now I have an idea where I'm going.
Okay.
Can we make money off of this idea though? Like let's say I make a website, you're the client or whatever. I have no idea what my diet is going to be yet, but
Okay.
I think up something like.
Oh, so if you have an idea and you want me to be your client, but it's a commercial idea, yeah, I don't. That's fine.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I mean,
I just can't do it as a job for another.
That's it. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, yeah, and that actually is for two reasons. I mean, it's probably mostly for the reason you're not even thinking of. One thing is if you're already being paid to do something, then that's not really extra work. This should be something over and above what you're getting paid for. But the other problem, and this is the one that's come up more times than not, is in the middle of the semester, student gets fired from said job. All right, and now they can't finish their project because they don't have access to the stuff they need to have access to, and now they're up in front of a group a la Caruso. And saying, well, this is what I was able to finish before things went south. So yeah, we don't do that anymore. So so I would say, like, for your project, you could have a target audience of the ice rinks, but you would really be developing it as more of a generic thing. So they could be your client, but it would be the type thing where you could. If you wreck the Zamboni and they can it's something you could still continue on with. You see what I'm getting at?
Yeah.
All right. But I mean, if it's something entrepreneurial and you want to, you think you can make money off, I'm fine with that. I mean, in fact, I would encourage that. I mean, maybe that'll make you more motivated to do it. Okay. But you can't let an employer pay you to do the work. Okay? If you're doing it for yourself because you're following some financial dream, that's okay. I'm fine with that. All right, other ideas? Go ahead.
Before computer science, I wanted to be a preschool or kindergarten teacher.
Okay.
And I wanted to create a math game. So I'm going to be a math teacher.
Yep.
Myself. So either like building like blocks or like Lego type things using leap motion, like air gestures.
Yep.
So like people with fine motor skills, they can easily grab things and stuff. So like either building I had a couple different things, but like one was a tower, and you grab them over here and you place it and you count. You'll have like 1, 2, 3 numbered blocks.
Okay.
And then
And this is so effectively software leveraging leap motion, targeted at a, kind of a like what age group?
preschool, kindergarten.
Okay,
how to
so early math or early math type stuff. So you would probably create kind of a you know a series of, you know, depending on how long each, you know, you have some ideas for what the puzzles might be like or what. So there would have to be enough of them to add up to kind of the time, or if you maybe had you created some sort of language, like something to allow like the teacher or something like that to create more games,
Mhm.
and they could plug it in through a web page or something like that, and you prove your proof of concept is you use that language to maybe develop 2 puzzles or something like that. That could be one possibility you might go with.
Like, do you mean, because I was going to say, like, having, like, 1 to 10, 10 to 20,
Mhm.
and then also, like, counting by 5s, 10s, and 20s.
Mhm. So I guess what I'm getting at is, so you have a couple of ideas for things that would be appropriate for the age group. So what if you created kind of a, you know, either a JSON representation or XML representation for describing that puzzle? So what you would do is you would have XML that described the puzzle to your software. Your software would then generate the leap motion puzzle thingy for that, so that a teacher potentially could, who doesn't know anything about programming, could create a little thing that would then they could use in their class that you didn't originally write. You know, they can take, you know, you almost create like a little modeling language for them to easily create a math game or a math puzzle, that type of thing. So that's one possibility, and then maybe you use your language to create like the 1 or 2 ideas you already have. Another possibility would be that you've effectively said, okay, well, this is what I envision being kind of a, you know, a curriculum for, you know, young kids to kind of get into math. So rather than you building that builder piece, you instead effectively build the piece of software that delivers all 8 puzzles or something like that. So that's the other way you can go. So you can either build a tool that allows the teacher to ultimately do the puzzles, then prove your tool works by doing 1 or 2 of the math puzzles with it, or just build the puzzles so you're effectively releasing a piece of software. And along those lines, if you do that, then you can turn around and, you know, go around and try to sell it to schools and stuff like that. So it could be monetized as well. So yeah, I think it's a good idea. Anything else? Yep.
I kind of wanted to try to do a website. I've been a part of the radio station here for 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
Everything we do, if anyone ever needs to contact us, they will just kind of come and find me. And our last big success of getting our name out there is the shirt Trey's wearing right now.
Okay.
We kind of had an idea, and we just never went through with it. We had a whole photo shoot in the green room. I met with Mark Wolf a couple times about it. He thinks it'd be a really good idea to have. And we've met with a couple other stations in here and back home in Florida that love to reach out to us, but they don't really have any other way of getting to us other than our Facebook page.
Okay. So on the surface, this could be a reasonable project. The challenge is going to be having it be a big enough scope. So websites are not very difficult to put together in general as a starting point. So you're going to have to think about it from a couple different levels. One, who's going to maintain it after you leave? So that's going to be part of it. So you're probably going to choose something like a WordPress or something like that. But also, you mentioned, you know, they need to be able to communicate with you. What does that mean? You know, it takes no time at all to throw a little email form on a web page. So that's not 300 hours worth of work. So you're going to have to further define what all this website's going to provide. You know, what are the things the website is going to let us do? Is it going to have video broadcasts or audio broadcasts of your radio shows or whatever? You know, what all does this thing do, and what infrastructures will you actually be building? Now, you're IT, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so you know, with that in mind, you're probably going to be you'll be using like something like a WordPress to you know, create the site. You'll have to use, if you're going to do some audio streaming stuff, you'll be using third-party things. You'll install the plugin. So your creation is going to be bringing those tools together under WordPress, but ultimately you're going to be using things that other people built, and that's okay. nothing wrong with that. But so my challenge to you then would be to define enough features / requirements of that website to dictate it's large enough for a senior seminar project. You know, because having a website with a contact us form isn't going to cut it. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. What else? Nothing? Going once? Going twice? Let me make sure I have the Slack channel set up for this class. I do, so everybody should join the 491 channel on Slack. So if you do have specific questions, you can either, well, if you have generalistic questions, you can post it here in Slack. Otherwise, you can send me a private message on Slack, or you can text me. I think most of you have my number, but if you don't,
Is that on the syllabus?
yeah, probably. But that's my cell phone. You can call it if you want. I probably won't pick up. I basically pick up my phone for my mom or my wife because I don't use my phone for speaking. But text is a great way of getting a hold of me. If you're not already in my contacts, though, just tell me who you are when you first contact me. Or email or Slack. All those come to my phone. Make sense? All right, so between now and Thursday, there should be some back and forth as you're brainstorming ideas, and we can even jump on a video chat or something like that if if that's easier than just texting back and forth. We can just have a 10-minute video chat where you can, even if it's like 9 o'clock at night, we'll just jump on a Google Hangout or something like that. And I'll, we can go back and forth a little bit, but, we should, when we come back to class on Thursday, it's going to be a pretty similar class to what the last 10 minutes has been, where I'm going to say, okay, does anybody have any, any questions? Because, next Tuesday, your idea paper should be submitted before class begins on Tuesday. All right, so we're basically going to stay as long on Thursday as you guys have questions or want me to clarify stuff, and then we're turn you back to the wild. You can text me, whatever. So I'm basically available to you during, let's say between 7 a.m. and probably 11 p.m. at night. I'm pretty reachable by text and stuff like that. So take advantage of that. Don't just wait till you can find me on campus. But we're not just going to sit in the room and stare at each other. So we will replace wasted classroom time with me making myself available, whatever. Go ahead.
I noticed that the due dates on.
I'll fix them, yeah, because I copied it in from the previous semester. So the idea paper due date will be a week from today before class starts, and then they'll be staged the weeks after that. Anything else? All right, I will see everybody on Thursday.